They know that they'll lose those Su-57s. If Russia wants to set up a dogfight with me in an F-16 and a Su-35, sign me up. Things that I know about those jets that I can't really speak about here, but during those unclassified dogfights, the thing I notice is just, I served in the US Air Force, active duty for almost 12 years. I went to actually Euro-NATO joint jet pilot training. That was really amazing for me. I got to, in my class, be with Norwegians, Germans, and then all of our instructors were from across pretty much every NATO country in the world. So that was amazing. Out of there, I got the F-15E Strike Eagle, and I went on to a combat deployment on my first assignment into Afghanistan. I flew 70 combat missions in Operation Enduring Freedom. After that, I went to my second operational assignment in the F-15E at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, northwestern United States. And then after that, I threw my name in the hat and got to fly one of these things right here, the F-16. It's a Thunderbird jet, so I did air shows around the globe.
Ukraine is part buying and part being gifted. Gripen C/Ds, the slightly older models, and then also the E's and F's, which are the newer version of the Gripen. For our viewers who may not know exactly what this aircraft is, can you give me a little rundown of what it's like, what the specs are, and what the uses of it are?
Yeah, for sure. So I've never flown the Gripen. I've studied it a lot, and I'm well aware of how capable it is. Very capable aircraft. And from what I can understand, it looks like there's going to be about 16 of the older models that will be gifted to Ukraine, and then after that, some more adapted models. So the way I look at it, this is just from the U.S. military perspective. I worked hand in hand with the Super Hornet, the F-18, that has a legacy model as well, and then that got upgraded to the Super Hornet. So a little bit bigger airframe, more capable, more avionics, and that's kind of what I see happening with the new E's and F's, the new version that's being, I think, purchased by Ukraine. So ultimately, this is a very capable jet. Everything I know about it, everything I've found from researching it, I've done a lot of reaction videos to the Gripen on my channel where I'll react to it flying in air shows. And something that I really like about it is it seems to be very slow speed maneuverable, and it's extremely fast too, with the reports I'm seeing saying it can go up to Mach 2. So when you have a jet that can do slow speed things really well and go that fast, it's really a hidden threat that can keep any enemy on its toes. So I'm going to compare it a little bit to the F-18 just because that's what I've done a lot of dogfights versus F-18s in dissimilar training while I was flying the F-15E. And so when I look at the way that slower maneuverable jets that are really good at slow maneuvering works, it puts you in a position where the adversary is really on edge. Because if a jet can operate and maneuver its nose around at slow speeds, that's kind of the big thing with dogfights. That's what you really need to be good at in order to basically point your nose, shoot the gun, or shoot a missile. A lot of these heat-seeking missiles, you have to be pointed a certain degree at the other jet, at the adversary, to get the heat-seeking missile off. And so I see the Gripen as a really amazing dogfighting jet. It's got canards in the front, which kind of look like a little mustache is the way I look at those things. And that gives you really good maneuverability early on. So like this F-16 and the F-15 up here, these don't have the canards, so you might not get as much nose maneuverability right off the bat. So there are some advantages and there's some disadvantages to having those canards as well. But the fact that the Gripen has that single engine, it's very maneuverable. And the big thing with the Gripen is its ability to operate off of austere fields and highways and things like that. And so in this conflict, in Ukraine, it's really about taking off from a place where Russia might not know, and then landing at a place where Russia might not know. So not necessarily taking off and landing from the same place. And that could be challenging with the F-16. We know that Ukraine has the F-16 as well, and they do have quick response forces with the F-16. So the F-16 can do it, but the thing I like about the Gripen is a little more of an ability for it to operate off of strips that maybe aren't as prepared. So the F-16, it's got that big intake underneath. Actually, this might be kind of cool. For your viewers to see, but the F-16 has this big intake underneath right here, which is great, and it hoovers up a ton of air, right? So this is sucking in air. I mean, this is like a Hoover vacuum. And in the United States, we have a company called Hoover. I don't know if you guys have that over in the UK. It really sucks up a ton of air. I mean, you can see a vortex form as these things are taxiing around. When you look at any imagery on YouTube where there's some weather, like if there's a little bit of humidity in the air, it'll just be sucking up air from the ground. And what that's going to do, unfortunately, is it's going to pull up pebbles and rocks too. So the fact that the intake being down below like this, it's great as far as from a performance perspective, because once you get this thing airborne, I mean, it's really hard to compete with this thing in a dogfight with any fighter aircraft in the world. But getting it airborne off of little austere strips where there's gravel, rocks, and things like that, that's going to be something that's going to create a lot of maintenance nightmares. And when you're operating these things, you're taking off from somewhere different than where you're landing. You have multiple different locations, highways, roads, hiding the different landing and takeoff strips. The Gripen's great, in my opinion, because I think it's less susceptible to FOD, which is foreign object damage, which is just pebbles and rocks and things like that, which people might not, when they think of a supersonic fighter jet, you might not think about this, but, a little pebble this big could disable a jet engine for, a couple hours, couple days while you're doing those repairs. And you can't afford that in, the level of the conflict that we're seeing in Ukraine with, massive amounts of drones flying in, cruise launched missiles coming in from Su-34s or other Russian adversaries. So that's something I really like about the Gripen.
And you kind of touched on it there about the fact that it can take off from any runway. I read somewhere that it was named essentially the most pragmatic jet ever built because of this. Do you think that this is the perfect jet for NATO in the sense that European geographically is very close together? Second to that, the fact that the Gripen only needs conscript level engineers to actually get it flying after it comes back from a mission.
Yeah, I think all those things you hit on are great. I think it's really important. Simplicity in maintenance is huge. And a lot of people won't talk about that. They talk about the performance of the fighter jet itself, but no fighter jet's going to get airborne for the combat mission that day if their maintenance isn't up to speed. But the thing I really like about what I'm seeing in the Ukraine conflict is the multitude of different fighter jets, because you want different options. These jets are good at different things. And so the different and varied types of arrows you have in your quiver, the better off you're going to be going up against the enemy. I mean, the enemy is going to change and adapt to certain things. So the more that you can keep them on their toes, you can keep, Gripen squadron, F-16 squadron. Russia doesn't necessarily know what they might be going up against that day or what their drones might be going up against that day. I think that's great. And the fact that the Gripen, some of the reports I'm seeing, you can correct, your viewers will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like 1,500 feet of takeoff and landing distance, maybe a little bit more than that. And that's just amazing. And that speaks to the canards as well in the front that can produce a lot more lift. So again, great slow flying aircraft, but that's also supersonic. That's going to lend to a lot of versatility in the Russian conflict and Ukraine conflict, where these jets can be taking off from really small areas where you wouldn't expect a fighter jet to be able to take off from. And when you have a fighter jet with the capabilities of the Gripen, the Meteor missile, some of the other heat-seeking missiles this thing can carry, air-to-ground ordnance. That's probably a less likely use of it at this point. But when you have that ability to hide these things behind trees, take off from a highway, and then go right into a fight, that's a really great capability. The F-16 is an amazing dogfighting platform. I mean, literally, I wouldn't want to go up against the F-16 in any fighter jet. But as far as taking it off from these really small, tiny strips, these little highways, again, you're going to run into some issues with that foreign object damage that we talked about.
And so you kind of mentioned the F-16 there. We know that the Ukrainians now have some F-16s. Their pilots are being trained up on it. When you look at those jets that Ukraine has, in terms of the Gripen, where do you think that role will fit best in the Ukraine conflict for that jet?
Well, I think the quick response forces, I'm not sure what the exact acronym is nowadays, but QRF is something that we use in the US military. And I've seen some of those videos from Ukraine where they have the trucks, they have the tractor trailers that are basically mobile quick response forces for Russian drones. And that's kind of the one big thing I would think about It's just protecting Kyiv, protecting some of the strategic areas, minimizing the damage, having these jets up and airborne. So having squadrons of Gripens, detached squadrons, kind of like roving motorcycle gangs of fighter jets where they can pop up from places that Russia might not expect. I think that creates a little bit more deterrence and it minimizes the damage, right? Because when I think about what Russia's doing, it's kind of like they're bombing for leverage. So there's been rumors of negotiations. There's been like a mini ceasefire, and then both sides kind of violated that ceasefire pretty quick over the last, I think that happened like maybe a month ago. And so having more jets up and the sortie count, having more that can be airborne, not creating a no-fly zone. We can get into that, how complicated that is, but kind of many versions of that where you're able to contest against these massive swaths of drones that Russia's firing over. I think having as many jets as possible, whether that's Gripens or F-16s, I think having the ability to get more and more sorties, because remember, you could have a lot of pilots that are good to go, but if you don't have the airframes, then you're going to have minimized your ability to protect the population. So at this point, when you think about numbers of force and mass of warfare, having as many jets as possible that are as low maintenance as possible, like you said, less of a demand from the maintaining side on the Gripen, that just gives the ability to have more of these airborne constantly around the clock. I mean, that would be my, something I would want in my country, is to have as many of these jets airborne, knowing that we're getting hammered by drones every day. Okay, well, how do we have like a little metal net around certain strategic areas where we can always get a fighter airborne, or they're sitting alert and we can always get them airborne? So if it's a cheaper jet to fly, I think the reports I'm seeing are somewhere around $20,000 per flight hour, somewhere in there, which is really good economy of warfare. Some of the more advanced jets, F-35, F-22, you're looking pretty high per flight hour, 50,000 to 100,000 per flight hour. That's going to limit you, with the amount you can put up, the amount of maintenance you can do. So the more, I think sometimes some people think you have to go extremely high tech, which, don't get me wrong, I love high tech. I love F-35s and F-22s as much as the next person. But when it comes to shooting down these Russian Shahed style drones, these little Dorito drones, most people have probably seen them. They're just like flying Doritos with a propeller on the back. Those aren't incredibly advanced. They might have a relatively low radar signature, but they're not advanced. They're not going to fire back. They're going to try to dodge radar. So if you can just get a jet that's a 4th generation jet, you can even look at the Gripen as like a 4+ generation jet, because it does have some of the features of a 5th generation jet, which is like an ASA radar, which is a phased array radar. Just means it's better at detecting and picking up threats. So if you can get more of these airborne for cheaper and keep them consistently going around the clock, and just kind of, that's kind of where we're at right now with the Ukraine war, right? Is like, wait out the clock. How long can Ukraine? I mean, Ukraine's doing a phenomenal job. I think we're over 4 years now, right, with the conflict. And so the fact that Ukraine is holding off Russia as good as they are, they're not that they're obviously taking losses as well, but inflicting that much pain and just basically giving the ability for the country to hold while, Russia feels more and more of that pain. That's something that I think the Gripen can do really well.
And you saw the F-35s, the F-22s coming into service. How do those jets compare to the Gripen? What advantages do they give? Do they essentially subscribe to a different philosophy of fighter jets than the Gripen does? Or is it simply that one is more advanced than the other?
Yeah. So F-35s, what a great, just an amazing combat jet. We've seen its combat prowess proven in conflicts over the last few months. And that was actually my follow-on assignment when I chose to leave the military and go into commercial aviation. But I did a lot of deep dives and a lot of deep research into the F-35 and the F-22. And the big thing with those jets are their skin. So the stealth on those is, all the way down to, the way the metal's manufactured, the way the composites are manufactured, the shape of the wings, radar absorbent paints and things like that. So the name of the game for the F-35 and the F-22 is stealth. So being able to compete with an adversary like China, where they're going to throw up a ton of aircraft, or like Russia, throw up a ton of drones, If you have stealth, now you can kind of lurk in the background and you can actually pump information to other jets, to fourth generation aircraft. So you could be maybe closer to the front lines using an advanced radar from one of these stealth aircraft to share and provide information. Now, the difference between a stealth aircraft like that and say like an F-15 you have here, F-16 or the Gripen, is they're not going to be as stealthy. So potentially more of a potential for those, potentially more of a potential. You guys know, you know what I mean. Throwing out a lot of potentials here, but ultimately when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, Russia's also moving, some of their surface-to-air missiles closer to the front lines, which would be like the S-400 and things like that. So what you might run into is just a little more of a susceptibility of this Gripen to be targeted. And that means you're going to have to hold it a little further back from the front lines, which I think is fine because you're not necessarily using, I don't know, my guess would be the Gripen's not necessarily being used for strikes into Russia. That's not really the strategy that I see it being used for. It's more of a protection point defense aircraft. So it's going to be a little further back from the lines. The term for that is DCA, defensive counter air. And that's what we would do in the F-15. That's what we had war gamed for the Taiwan Strait, protecting Taiwan. This is more of a strategy of protection. And so that's kind of what I see the Gripen being. It's kind of the high stakes bouncer, at the world's most violent nightclub at this point, the front lines of Ukraine and Russia. But this thing's in the background there to kind of be point defense rather than an offensive fighter, whereas an F-35, F-22, more of an offensive fighter where you can pull that thing in, get it close to any enemy, any adversary in the world, and they won't be able to see it, at least with radar.
And this is, I guess, onto the first of these common questions that we get, which is, why do we not see dogfights in Ukraine or even bombing runs? We get, Tupolievs coming a few miles off the coast of Ukraine and sort of unloading missiles into Odessa, something like that. But what we don't see is, large-scale bombing runs coming over Ukrainian territory, and we don't see, Su-35s and maybe in the future Gripens going at it above the battlefield. Why is that?
So Russia's strategy, from what I've seen, has been a lot more focused on glide bombs and standoff weapons. And anytime you see that happening, it's typically because the adversary feels like their aircraft will get shot down by some sort of surface-to-air missile system that they're not capable of defending against. And I think Russia's smart. They know that if they fly any of these jets, near any of these surface-to-air missile systems, Western missile systems, they're going to go bye-bye real quick. And Russia's got an aging fleet. They're heavily sanctioned. Their maintenance isn't great, and so them losing some of these, their advanced version of the fighter, which would be like the Su-35, Su-33, it's kind of their workhorse jet. They don't want to lose those. They want to keep the ability of those to continue to get those glide bombs and those more cruise missile style weapons up and enact pain onto the populace of Ukraine, hoping to gain more and more territory. So if they fly their jets over these surface-to-air missiles, they're not going to have a chance against them. So that's why that's not happening. And then I would say, as far as Ukraine going in and bombing Russia, again, is the juice really worth the squeeze? I don't think so either. So kind of vice versa, Ukraine knows that if they do that, then there will be the chance of losing some of these fighters, which are precious for point defense at this point, because Russia's surface-to-air missile systems are no slouch. You got the S-400, which is an advanced surface-to-air missile system. So you don't want to waste an F-16 with a job that a drone could do, or some other weapon could do. So when I look at Ukraine's philosophy, more of defensive, protect and save your fighter jets, Russia is a little more offensive, but they're doing the same thing. They want to protect and preserve their fighter jets. They even have, a 4+ jet called the Su-57, Russia does, which is a capable fighter, but it's not as stealthy as they would like to think. And so that's why we're not seeing that one, fly deep strike missions anywhere as well, because, they're pretty much aware that they're going to claim it's a 5th generation jet, claim it can avoid radar. But at the end of the day, I think behind the scenes, if you go into some of the vaults where Russia's actually, has the classified information of, what their strategy is, they know that they'll lose those Su-57s if they fly them over the wrong piece of territory.
And it'd be great to talk a little bit more about that comparison between the Ukrainian Air Force and the Russian Air Force. Specifically Russia. At the start of the war, you had near identical aircraft, aside from the fact that Ukraine had a lot fewer of them. Now you've got Mirage 2000s, F-16s, and then in the future Rafales and also Gripens going up against Russia's latest tech. Who has the edge there?
Well, I think from a technology perspective, I would give the nod to Ukraine having all these European jets and Western F-16s as well, even though they might not be some of the latest right now. As far as the Gripens that they're about to get, the F-16s. I know there were some of the older F-16s. I know that they've been adapted as well. So when you think of Russia, they don't think like Europe or the West. So Europe and the West, we think more like strategy, technology, one shot, one kill, efficiency, technology leading the charge. Avionics, all these jets being able to talk to each other, being able to integrate with airborne warning and control systems. I think there's a Saab airborne warning and control system. I could be wrong on the brand there, but basically a converted Gulfstream style jet that has a massive radar on it that's pumping information to the different Western fighter, the F-16, and then it's able to integrate and pump information to the Mirage 2000 and eventually the Gripen once it's in theater as well. So technology is the focus for Europe and the West, right? We've always focused on that, and I love that. I think that's amazing. But when you think about Russia, their focus is more numbers. So I mean, you can even see it with the way that Russia, they're bigger. They want masses of numbers. They don't care about attrition as much. They want to overwhelm with saturation. So you're kind of playing two different games. You're playing apples and oranges. Personally, I think in the long run, the technology will win. Technology, in my opinion, always wins in warfare. But you can't discount the fact that numbers have a huge say in how warfare, unfolds as well. So Russia's focus will be Su-35s, Su-33s, not necessarily their new Su-57, because the Su-57 would be their version of technology, right? Which we've seen minimal of those. We just saw one fly a couple weeks ago that it was a two-seater, and they likely integrated that the second seat in the back, because they couldn't get the technology to function correctly with one pilot in there trying to operate the drones. It's supposedly operating with CCA's, combat collaborative aircraft. So you have one fighter pilot in there and they tried to do the integration, couldn't quite get that right. So, hey, what's the next step? Just throw a second seat in the back and then we can fully focus on technology in the back seat and then just the flying the aircraft in the front seat, which, that makes sense to me that Russia would do that. But I think all these things we're seeing just highlight those two different philosophies of technology versus numbers.
You flew combat missions for a living, and when you look to the Russian Air Force, and you can pick a jet that you flew, whichever's your favorite to go up against. Which Russian aircraft do you look at and you think, I actually wouldn't want to come up against that in a dogfight?
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of flying on a digital combat simulator. There's some videos on my channel too, if anybody's interested in seeing that, but I've done fights against Russian jets. Now, digital combat simulator isn't going to be exactly correct, but there's some interesting aspects to it. So during those dogfights, that's all unclassified, obviously. And, there's other things that I know about those jets that I can't really speak about here. But during those unclassified dogfights, the thing I notice is just how those jets have a lot of things. They have a lot of missiles. They have a lot of countermeasures. And so the Su-35 in particular, it's a big aircraft. I mean, if you see the Su-35 and you compare it next to an F-16, I haven't actually seen it size-wise compared next to a Gripen. And then the adaptation of the Gripen is going to be a little bigger. But let's just take the older model of the Gripen. I'm pretty willing to bet that the Su-35 is going to dwarf that as far as size goes. It's got two engines, two people. The Gripen single, there's two-seat Gripens as well, but single engine jet. So the size of the Russian jets are kind of the big thing that you have to think about. And the Su-35 to me is probably the biggest adversary. Not that I wouldn't want to go up against it. I mean, hey, if Russia wants to set up a dogfight with me in an F-16 and a Su-35, sign me up. I'll do it. That'll go viral on YouTube like that, I'm sure. So let's do it. But I think the size of that thing just shows me, okay, a lot of missiles, big radar, because fighter jets are really just structures built around radars. And so now with the adaptation of the AESA radar, that kind of minimizes that a little bit. because a small ASA radar is going to be amazing compared to like a smaller legacy radar that has to kind of scan and rotate, kind of like you see in the movies where it has like that radar dial that goes around. So that old school type radar isn't in the Gripen. The Gripen's been adapted, at least the newer models will be adapted to have an ASA. So that might minimize that a little bit, but the Su-35 is the adversary that I would say is Russia's workhorse. It's got one of their bigger radars, carries a lot of missiles, and then a lot of countermeasures. A lot of countermeasures means chaff and flare. And so even in the game DCS, when I'm flying that around and I go up against that Su-35, it just starts puking out flares. Just all, it's pretty wild to see how many flares that puts out. Now, how accurate is that? That's a simulation, that's a game. But there's some realistic aspects to that, and so I think it would be a challenge, one that I wouldn't shy away from, and I don't think any of these Ukrainian fighter pilots would shy away from either. But that's probably at the top of their list when it comes to threat study.
And if I was to put you in the shoes of a Ukrainian pilot potentially, protecting cities from Shahed drones, going out nightly and trying to essentially stop civilians from being killed, talk me through the process of kind of what goes through the mind of a pilot when you're running those kinds of missions and exactly what that's like.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say, a saying that we have in the U.S. is cojones. And I don't know if you guys have that over there, but the cojones on these fighter pilots over there is huge. Like, they're going out every single day protecting their homeland, knowing full well that Russia's going to throw everything they have at them as they get airborne. And they're in combat as soon as they take off. Even if they're still over Ukrainian territory, they're in combat. So it's just a whole nother mentality that we see with these pilots, and just the bravery that they have to go up and do this is amazing. They've had a lot of successes, but they've had a lot of losses too. So this is personal for them. Every single day is personal for them. Their homeland's being attacked, and so you back a pit bull into a corner, and you got to watch out. So they're a formidable force. These fighter pilots from Ukraine are exceptional fighter pilots. I've got some personal friendships with folks that know these fighter pilots, that are helping them, training them, know about what they're facing. And the thing that I keep hearing is just the fortitude and the desire to not back down is massive. When it comes to, so that's the first step. You got to have that fighter pilot mindset, and it's alive and well in Ukraine from everything that I know. And then the second thing is just, being diligent and never letting your guard down. You never want to think, oh, I've got an F-16, so today's going to be an easy day. Or I've got a Gripen, so today is going to be an easy day. You have to go out every single day and know that the enemy you're facing today has adapted from yesterday. And that's kind of one of the things I cover in my book here, is focusing on the different adaptations that the enemy makes should make you pivot and adapt and adjust every single day as well. Every single morning you wake up, you should ask yourself, how can I do that mission better today? How can I, run my business better today? How can I have better personal relationships today? That's exactly what these fighter pilots are doing, but for them it's personal, it's combat, and the stakes are insanely high. So it comes down to operating your jet extremely well and then studying the enemy also. You have to know what the enemy is. And so these fighter pilots are likely, they land from their missions and they're going right into target study as well. What drones did we take down today? What else did we see today? What can we share in our community so that maybe someone doesn't make the same mistake as us? So it's essentially like entrepreneurship with a fighter jet is how I look at it. And that's how you have to think. You have to think like an entrepreneur. You have to adapt and adjust. Every tactic you have needs to be looked at, studied under a microscope. It might have worked today, but is it going to work tomorrow? So it's an agility that takes place up here. Now it takes place, in the aerial sky, in the warfare, in the air, in the skies with these things, with these fighter jets. But really, it's a question of how much are you adapting up here, and how well are you able to see the shifts the enemy might have made today that are going to shift the way they're going to fight you tomorrow. It's intuition, it's perception, it's knowledge of self. Knowledge of self is huge. That goes all the way back to the days of Sun Tzu. You got to know yourself. You got to know your limitations. You got to know your strengths. And then you combine that with your community and you share that in the most vulnerable way that you possibly can, so that you're getting the truth across of what you saw, what you fought, what the enemy might throw at you tomorrow, and how to keep your community safe. And I think that's what this group of fighter pilots is probably doing on the daily. And a lot of that comes from debriefs. So after these combat missions, and this is what we would do in combat as well, we would debrief about any threats we saw, any potential threats that could come up tomorrow, how we struck the enemy, and how we could do it better the next day.
There's one last question that I'd love to put to you, which is why is there no fly zone over Ukraine, and why is it so hard to enforce one?
Yes. Well, NATO enforcing a no-fly zone, I guess I'll look at it first. I'll kind of like zoom out and just look at it from like a 50,000 foot perspective. So a no-fly zone established by Ukraine would be one thing, but not having enough metal to do it is probably the limitation there. So Ukraine doing this themselves is going to be extremely hard. The border of Ukraine with Russia, it's big. It's a large border, massive chunk of earth. And when it comes to a no-fly zone, you think of a fighter jet. I can't give you the exact ranges that maybe one fighter jet could really realistically control, but let's just say that would take, to enforce that, let's say it would take 300 fighter jets minimum. So now you're talking about operating a Air Force, a large Air Force. I mean, that's about the size, from what we've seen through reports, that's about the size that we've seen of the full amount of fighter jets that are in the Middle East right now for the U.S. Air Force, probably somewhere between 300 to 500. And they're not enforcing a no-fly zone, right? But those sorties are taking place around the clock. And so enforcing a no-fly zone means you make a airtight piece of earth, and point defense is different than a no-fly zone. So point defense of a city means you could probably do that with 8 jets, maybe 12 jets or something like that. But enforcing that much of a no-fly zone, and oh, by the way, you've got drones coming in, you've got cruise missiles, you've got ballistic missiles that could be coming in as well. So now there's just so many different things that go into that. And Article 5, for NATO says that, if another NATO nation is attacked, then NATO will step in. Now, Ukraine isn't technically a part of NATO. So how do you then legally also justify, well, we're going to send 300 fighter jets from the US, from Europe, and from Ukraine's own indigenous forces to enforce a no-fly zone? You get into some pretty risky territory there because, again, remember, Russia, nuclear-armed country, Europe, US, nuclear-armed countries. So focusing on a no-fly zone risks some escalation there as well. So you have to really ask yourself, again, what are the ripple effects of a no-fly zone established by NATO? So as you can see, lots of moving parts, really hard for that much earth. For any of the US viewers that are watching this, that's about 1,200 miles, I think. And so that much sky is just gonna be so hard to cover. But point defense, that's when you're defending strategic targets with the Gripen launching from highway-based, mobile units that can be, here 1 second, over here the next, unpredictable. That's more of the entrepreneurial style of warfare that I think I see this going. I don't really see the no-fly zone being feasible just because of the size.